I'm going to tell you something that completely changed my view on wealth accumulation, and that most investors take decades to discover or never discover. The first 100,000 reais are not just a round number or a psychological milestone. They are the mathematical difference between those who are stuck in the middle class their entire lives and those who build generational wealth. And when I say that, I'm not talking about cheap motivation or a story of overcoming. I'm talking about pure mathematics proven over centuries of financial markets. I've spent 45 years studying how fortunes are made and destroyed. I've managed $160 billion through 4 major crises, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that there is a mathematical inflection point in the process of capital accumulation that most people never reach because they don't understand the stark difference between saving the first 100,000 and saving the second 100,000. The uncomfortable truth is that your first $100,000 will require 80% of the total effort to reach the first million, but will only represent 10% of the result. It's unfair, it's brutal, and that's exactly why 92% of Brazilians never accumulate significant wealth. They give up before crossing the threshold, where the math of compound interest finally starts working for them instead of against them. Let me show you the exact numbers that prove this. If you save 1,000 reais per month, with a return of 10% per year above inflation, it takes 7 years and 9 months to earn the first 100,000 reais. But to go from 100,000 to 200,000 reais, it only takes 4 years and 8 months. From 200,000 to 400,000, 3 years and 2 months. From 400,000 to 800,000, 2 years and 1 month. From 800,000 to 1,600,000, just 1 year and 4 months. Do you notice the pattern? The time to double your capital decreases exponentially as your base grows. Charlie Munger, who spent 70 years alongside Warren Buffett, building one of the greatest fortunes in the world, said something that should be engraved in the mind of every beginning investor. The first 100,000 is a bitch, but you need to do it. After that, the mountain becomes less steep. And if you're not already subscribed to this channel, subscribe now because I'm going to show you exactly how to cross that first barrier that separates dreamers from real wealth builders. And this information can compress into 5 years what would take most people 20 to discover on their own. The mathematical reason why the first 100,000 is so critical has to do with 3 forces that work against you in the beginning and only start working in your favor once you cross that threshold. The first force is what I call the deadweight loss of small capital. When you have 10,000 reais invested, generating 10% per year, your capital works for you, generating only 1,000 reais per year. 1,000 reais per year is 83 reais per month. You barely notice that money appearing. It is invisible in your standard of living. It changes absolutely nothing in your financial reality. So psychologically, you don't feel the benefits of the investment. The entire weight of accumulation is still on your shoulders, on your active work, on your monthly discipline of saving. But when you have 100,000 reais generating the same 10%, now we are talking about 10,000 reais per year, 833 reais per month. That's what you feel. This pays a relevant bill. That's an extra minimum wage working for you while you sleep. The second force is the opportunity cost of ignorance. In the early years of accumulation, most people make brutal mistakes because they are learning. They put money into bad investments, pay absurd fees, sell in panic, buy at the top, follow tips from acquaintances, enter disguised pyramids. When you only have $5,000 or $10,000, these mistakes cost a few hundred or thousands of dollars. It hurts, but it is recoverable. You learn and move on. But imagine making the same beginner's mistakes when you already have 500,000 or $1 million. Now we are talking about losses of 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 reais. Losses that can set you back years. The first 100,000 phase is your practical investment university. You pay monthly fees in the form of small losses and errors. And when you finally cross the 100,000, You've already paid for most of that education, and future mistakes will be fewer and less frequent. The third force is behavioral friction versus behavioral momentum. Behavioral finance studies that we analyzed at Bridgewater show that people with less than $50,000 invested have a 78% chance of withdrawing their money in moments of personal crisis or temptation. A problem with the car, a trip, a course, an apparent business opportunity. Small capital is psychologically sacrificable. You rationalize that 60% of 10,000 doesn't make that much of a difference, and then you cash out. But people who have accumulated over 100,000 reais have only a 21% chance of withdrawing in times of crisis. Why? Because 100,000 reais represents years of sacrifice. It represents a new identity. You are now someone who has 6 figures invested. This creates a psychological shield. You find another way to solve the car problem because you don't want to be the person who destroyed years of construction over a $5,000 problem. Then the behavioral momentum changes dramatically after the 100,000. And I want to know from you, where are you watching this video from? Leave a comment telling me your city and country, because I want to understand how many people around the world are really committed to crossing this barrier of the first 100,000 reais, or its equivalent in their local currency, because this will help me create more specific content for the realities of each region. Now let me tell you 2 real stories that perfectly illustrate the cost of never crossing 100,000 and the power of crossing. The first story is about an engineer I met in 2003 in São Paulo. I'll call him Roberto. Roberto was 32 years old, earning reasonably well by Brazilian standards at the time, around 8,000 reais a month. He started investing at the age of 28 after reading about financial independence. He saved 20,000 reais in 2 years by saving aggressively. I was excited, studying, doing everything right. He put the money in a combination of fixed income and some stocks. But then came 2008. The Brazilian market plummeted 41.2%. His 20,000 turned into 11,600. Roberto panicked. He sold everything in the fund in March 2009. He was traumatized. He decided that investing in the stock market was a casino and left everything in savings again. In the following years, between 2009 and 2020, the Ibovespa multiplied 6 times in dollars and much more in reais, adjusted for inflation. If Roberto had kept the 11,600 and continued to contribute only 500 reais per month during these 11 years, he would have crossed not only 100,000 but 500,000 reais in 2020. Instead, he had 63,000 reais in savings that barely kept up with inflation. The difference? 437,000 reais. Nearly 500,000 lost because he never developed the resilience needed to cross the first hurdle. Today, Roberto is 54 years old, still working, and he told me in 2023 that his biggest financial mistake was giving up in 2009. The second story is the opposite. A university professor in Belo Horizonte, I'll call her Marina. Marina started investing in 2006 at the age of 29. At the time, he earned 3,500 reais. He lived on 2,500 and invested 1,000 a month religiously. When 2008 arrived and her savings of 30,000 reais fell to 17,000, she did the opposite of Roberto. She read, studied, understood that she was seeing an opportunity, not a catastrophe. Maintained contributions. In 2009, when people were selling, she was buying. It crossed 100,000 reais in 2012, 6 years after it started. And here is the critical point. From 2012 to 2018, just 6 years, it went from 100,000 to 570,000 reais, maintaining the same monthly contributions, but now with a much larger base generating compound returns. Today, Marina is 48 years old and has a net worth of 1,800,000 reais. She retired from traditional employment in 2022, lives off passive income, and told me that the turning point in her financial life was when she first saw her investment generating more money in a month than she could save from her salary. This happened when she had 140,000 reais invested. From that point on, she knew the machine was working. She had crossed the threshold. The difference between Roberto and Marina wasn't intelligence. It wasn't initial income. It wasn't luck. It was resilience to go through the most difficult and painful phase of capital accumulation. The first 100,000 tests you in ways that the second 100,000 never will, because the second 100,000 arrives faster, with proportionally less effort, and with the confidence of someone who has already proven to themselves that they can accumulate. Now, let's look at the framework I used at Bridgewater to help young analysts understand the process of building personal wealth. I call this the steep mountain principle. Imagine that building wealth is like climbing a mountain. The first half, sees vertical of the mountain, represents going from 0 to 100,000 reais. The second vertical half represents going from 100,000 to 1 million reais. Same vertical distance on the graph. But here's the math trick. The first half is almost vertical, steep, brutal. Each step requires maximum effort. You feel every meter. You sweat. Your muscles burn. You want to give up. The second half has a slope that progressively decreases. Each step becomes easier because gravity, which once worked against you pulling you down, now works for you pushing you forward through compound interest. Why does this work? Because compound interest has a tipping point. In the beginning, when your base is small, compound interest is barely noticeable. 10% of 10,000 is 1,000, invisible in your year, but 10% of 500,000 is 50,000. That's a whole year's worth of savings for someone who earns 4,000 a month. Now you have two salaries working for you, your active salary and your capital salary. When you reach 1 million, 10% is 100,000 reais. Now you have three salaries. Your work plus two extra salaries coming from the accumulated capital, and the scale only increases. Out of 2 million, you have 5 salaries working. Out of 5 million, you have 10 salaries. What most people don't understand is that this effect is not linear. It's not a smooth ramp. It is an exponential curve that remains practically flat for the first few years and then takes off vertically. And the point where it starts to take off, mathematically, is between 80,000 and 150,000 reais, depending on your rate of return and monthly contributions. That's why Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett, and every serious investor I know talks about the brutal importance of the first 100,000. It's not superstition. It's mathematics proven over centuries. Now the question that matters is how you actually get there. How do you get through those first 7 to 10 years to cross the 100,000 when everything inside you wants to give up, when emergencies pop up, when friends are traveling and you're saving, when it feels like it's going to take forever? I'm going to give you 7 specific actions that condense everything I learned about this process. First action you need to master is what I call the ruthless savings automaton. Most people treat savings as what is left over at the end of the month. They pay all the bills, live normally, and if there is anything left over, they invest it. This is the opposite of what works. This approach generates zero savings in 87% of cases because life expands to consume all available income. It's Parkinson's law applied to personal finances. What works is the reverse system. You pay yourself first. On the day your salary drops, before you pay any bills, before you see your available balance, an automatic transfer takes 15 to 30% of your income and puts it directly into the investment. Automatic. No decision. No negotiation. Without, I will save this month or not. The percentage depends on your situation, but the rule is simple. If you want to reach 100,000 in less than 10 years, you need at least 15% of your gross income to go towards investment. If you want to arrive in less than 7 years, you need 25 to 30%. This seems impossible to most because they look at the current standard of living and think I can't cut 30%. But here's the secret I discovered by observing hundreds of cases. You don't cut from the current standard. You freeze the current pattern and direct all future income growth. Let's say you earn 4,000 reais today, and spend $3,800. You're not going to be able to cut it to $2,800 overnight, but you can freeze the $3,800. Next year, when you get a raise and earn $4,500, you continue living on $3,800, and the extra $700 goes straight to investment. 2 years later, you earn $5,200. He continues to live on $3,800. Now he invests $1,400 a month. In 3 to 4 years, you reach 25% savings rate without feeling like you have cut anything from your current standard. It just didn't expand. And here's the cat's leap. Set up the automatic transfer to happen on the same day your salary drops. Not 2 days later, not the following week, on the same day. You never see that money in your checking account. It does not exist for you. Your financial life operates with what's left. The first month will be strange. In the third month, you don't even remember. In 6 months, it will be the new normality. In 2 years, you can't imagine living any other way. At Bridgewater, when we analyze patterns of success in capital accumulation, we find that people with automatic savings have a 68% success rate in achieving 5-year goals. People who manual savers have an 11% success rate. The difference is so brutal that it's not even a comparison. Automation removes the need for daily discipline. You only need discipline once, on the day you set up the system. After that, the system works on autopilot. The second critical action is the anti-lifestyle inflation shield. This is the silent wealth killer for the emerging middle class. Let me explain the pattern I saw destroy hundreds of potential millionaires. Person starts earning $4,000 a month. He lives on $3,500, invests $500. It's piling up. 3 years later, with raises and career progression, he is earning $7,000. But now he lives in a better apartment, has a newer car, eats out more often, travels more, and he continues to invest $500 a month. Income increased by 75%, but savings remained the same. The savings percentage fell from 12.5% to 7%. It will take this person 30 years to reach their first million. The alternative version, same income progression. But she established an inviolable rule. For every 1,000 reais of income increase, 800 go to investment, and 200 can be spent improving living standards. When it goes from 4,000 to 7,000, of the 3,000 increase, 2,400 goes to investment. She now invests 2,900 a month instead of 500. The standard of living has subtly improved with the extra 600. She doesn't feel deprivation, but the accumulation rate has exploded. She will reach her first million in 11 years instead of 30. 19 years apart, almost 2 decades, all because of how she managed lifestyle inflation. The framework I recommend is the 80-20 income growth rule. 80% of any increase goes to investment. 20% can improve quality of life. This allows progress in living standards without destroying accumulation potential. You won't feel like you're stuck living the same way forever, but you also won't fall into the trap of expanding your expenses in proportion to your income. And here is a brutal truth that no one likes to hear, but that needs to be said. If you have increased your income by 50% in the last 5 years, but your wealth has not increased by at least 150%, you are failing. You are letting lifestyle inflation steal your future. The good news? It is fully reversible. You just need to establish the 80-20 rule from now on and follow it relentlessly. Third action is what I call brutal rate of return optimization. The difference between accumulating your first 100,000 in 8 years versus 12 years is generally not the amount saved, it's the rate of return earned. And here's where most people make mistakes that cost them years. They put everything into savings out of fear, or they put everything into individual actions out of greed. Both are fatal errors. Let me show you the math. If you invest 1,000 reais per month in savings, yielding 4% per year above inflation, it will take you 10 years and 2 months to reach 100,000 reais. If you invest the same 1,000 per month in a diversified portfolio, yielding 9% per year above inflation, it takes you 7 years and 3 months. 2 years and 11 months apart. Almost 3 years of your life saved or wasted based on where you put your money. But here's the trick. For a beginner investor, it's not about picking winning stocks. It's about not making stupid choices that destroy capital. At Bridgewater, we developed the concept of maximizing risk-adjusted return, not gross return. Gross return is how much you earn when it works. Risk-adjusted return is how much you earn considering that sometimes it will go wrong. For the first 100,000, the ideal strategy is aggressive enough to capture growth, but diversified enough not to explode into a crisis. What does this mean in practice? 60 to 70% in low-cost global or Brazilian equity index funds, 20 to 30% in quality fixed income, 10 to 20% in alternative assets like real estate funds or REITs, 0% on individual stocks if you have less than 50,000 invested, 0% on cryptocurrencies if you have less than 80,000 invested, 0% in startups or private equity if you have less than 500,000 invested. Why these strict rules? Because individual stocks, crypto, startups have volatility and risk of permanent loss that can set you back years when you have a small base. A 30% loss when you have 10,000 reais puts you 6 months behind. Recoverable. A 30% loss when you have 80,000 sets you back 2 years. Devastating. The first 100,000 phase is not the stay phase, are rich quick. It's a phase of not becoming poor slowly. This is the phase of accumulating a solid foundation. After the 100,000, then you can start allocating 5 to 10% in more aggressive bets. But for the first 100,000, you play the game of not losing, not the game of winning big. And here is something that few people know. We studied thousands of portfolios of Brazilian and American investors over 20 years. Investors who reached their first million before the age of 40 had a common characteristic. They averaged returns of 8 to 12% per year consistently during the accumulation phase. Not 20%, not 30%, not spectacular performance, just solid, consistent returns without big drops. Investors who didn't make their first million before they were 50 had another common characteristic. They had spectacular years of 20, 30, even 40% returns. But there were also years of minus 15, minus 20%. The average was 5 to 6%. Volatility destroyed compounding. So the rule of thumb for the first 100,000 is consistent low double-digit return beats inconsistent high double-digit return. Every year, no exception. And that means low-cost index funds, real diversification, annual rebalancing, and patience not to move when the market drops 15%. Fourth action is the firewall against emergencies. This is the action that most people ignore, and that most often causes failure to reach 100,000. Here is the destructive pattern. Person saves 20,000 reais invested. Car breaks down and repair costs 4,000. She has no emergency fund. Then withdraw 4,000 from the investment. 3 months later, health problems. Another 3,000 withdrawn. 6 months later, an opportunity for an important course, plus 5,000. In 1 year, it returned to 8,000 invested. All progress destroyed by predictable emergencies. And here is the error in thinking. She thought she was investing when in fact she was just putting money into an account with no immediate liquidity. Real investment requires firewall. The firewall is your emergency reserve. 3 to 6 months of essential expenses in a safe, liquid account. This is not investment. It's safe. It's protection. It's what allows your real investment to grow without interruption. The rule is crystal clear. Before investing aggressively for the 100,000, you need to set aside a minimum of 3 months of expenses. If you spend 3,000 a month on essential expenses, you need 9,000 in reserve. Only after that do you start chasing the 100,000 for real. And here's what's counterintuitive. Building the reserve first seems like it will delay reaching the 100,000. It actually speeds up. Why? Because it eliminates interruptions. Without a reserve, you will withdraw from the investment 3 to 5 times during the first few years. Each serve takes you months back and breaks compounding. With reserves, you keep your investment untouchable during crises, compounding works without interruption, and you arrive at your destination faster even if you started investing aggressively a few months later. At Bridgewater, when we stress test financial plans, the first thing we test is the ability to absorb 3 simultaneous financial shocks of $5,000 each without touching the long-term investment. If the plan fails this test, it is doomed to failure. So your fourth action is to build or top off your emergency fund before you accelerate to the 100,000. And when you have the reservation, treat it as sacred. It only breaks down in a true emergency, and a true emergency is health, housing, or essential transportation to work. It's not a trip, it's not a course, it's not an opportunity, it's not a new iPhone. Fifth action is the positive psychological reinforcement mechanism. This action is about hacking your own psychology to maintain motivation during the toughest years. The uncomfortable truth is that the first 3 years of saving for your 100 grand are psychologically devastating. You feel deprived. You see friends spending. You feel like you are sacrificing the present for an uncertain future. And what's worse, you look at the balance and see growth that seems pathetic. Did you collect $13,000 in a whole year? It seems like a joke. It will take 8 years at this rate. How do you stay motivated when progress seems glacial? You need artificial milestones that create a sense of progress. At Bridgewater, we've found that humans need positive feedback every 3 to 6 months, or they start to give up on long-term goals. Then you create intermediate milestones. Instead of thinking I need to reach 100,000, you think I need to reach 5,000 by March. He arrives. Celebrate. Feel victory. Next milestone, 10,000 by August, then 15,000 until December. You break the 7-year journey into 25 small victories of 3 months each. Every victory releases dopamine. Every victory IO reinforces the identity of a successful accumulator. And here's the most powerful psychological trick I've discovered. You celebrate not the absolute balance, but the relative growth rate. When you go from 0 to 5,000, you have grown infinite percent. Impossible to calculate. When it goes from 5 to 10,000, it has grown 100%. When it goes from 10 to 15,000, 50%. In the first few years, you are doubling or growing your wealth by 50% each year, even if the absolute numbers are small. This is incredible. This is cause for real celebration. After crossing 50,000, the percentages slow down, but the absolute numbers explode. Now you grow 15 to 20% a year, but that represents 10 to 15,000 reais. So in the first half, you celebrate percentages. In the second half, you celebrate absolutes. Both keep you motivated, but for different reasons. And there is another critical psychological element. You need to visualize the future concretely. Don't just think, I'll have 100,000 someday. But calculate exactly what date you will reach based on current contributions and conservative rate of return. Put it on the calendar. May of 2031. Exact day. You transform an abstract objective into a real date, and then you update this projection every quarter. If you had a good quarter, the date moves forward. If you had a bad quarter, delay. You see the impact of every decision. Did you decide to travel spending 3,000? The date was delayed by 2 months. Did you get a raise and increase your contribution? The date moved forward 5 months. Cause and effect become visible. And here's something that few do, but that makes a huge difference. You create a spreadsheet where you track not only total assets, but net worth per capita in your life. How much wealth each day of your life generated. When you are 28 years old and 20,000 invested, you have 71 reais per day of life lived. When you are 30 years and 40,000, now it is 133 reais per day of life. You are literally getting richer every day you exist, and you want to see that number go up every month. This metric creates an internal game where each month you try to beat your personal record for net worth per capita. It sounds silly, but it works because it turns accumulation into competition against yourself. Sixth action is shielding against toxic influences from the environment. This action is brutal because it requires you to confront uncomfortable truths about the people around you. The reality is that most people in your social circle don't want you to be financially successful. Not because they are bad, but because their success exposes their mediocrity. When you save 25% of their income, you force them to confront the fact that they save zero. When you invest instead of traveling, you force them to confront that they are prioritizing short-term pleasure over long-term security. And their defense mechanism is to discourage you. They say you are living like a poor person, and then you are rich later. They say, life is now. Enjoy it while you're young. They say, what's the point of having money if you don't use it? They say, you are missing the best years of your life. And if you're not prepared for these messages, they will erode your resolve. Because humans are social animals. We want group acceptance. And when the group is telling you that your behavior is wrong, you start to doubt. So the sixth action is relentlessly curating your social environment. You need at least 2 or 3 people in your close circle who are on the same path. People who are also aggressively hoarding. People who understand short-term sacrifice. People who will give you a high five when you say, I turned down that trip to meet the quarter's investment goal. If you don't have these people physically near you, you find them online. Buyer communities, investor groups, forums. You need a tribe that reinforces behavior rather than sabotages it. And you need to learn to say no without justifying yourself. When a friend invites you on an expensive trip, you don't say, I can't, because I'm saving money to invest. This opens the door to judgment and pressure. You say, I'm not going this time, and change the subject. No explanation, no justification. You don't owe satisfaction about your financial choices to people who aren't building what you're building. And here's the hardest part. Sometimes you will need to temporarily move away from close friends who are at a different stage in life. Not because you don't like them, but because the current social dynamics are incompatible with their objectives. They want to go out every weekend. You want to stay home 70% of the weekends saving money. Forcing coexistence creates friction. You feel bad saying no over and over again. They feel bad being rejected over and over again. Friendship suffers from any shape. Sometimes the best choice is to reduce coexistence for 3 to 5 years. Focus on building it and reconnect when you are in another phase. It looks cold, but it's realistic. And many of the friendships that really matter will survive the distance. The ones that don't survive probably weren't as deep as you thought. At Bridgewater, we have a principle that says, your environment determines your results more than your intentions. You can have every intention in the world of accumulating wealth, but if you are surrounded by people who spend everything, travel constantly, and judge those who save, you will fail. So environment curation is not optional. It is mandatory for success. Seventh action is continuous financial education as a compound advantage. This action is about turning the years of accumulating the first 100,000 into years of intensive finance education. Most people treat these years as just a time to save and wait. Brutal error. These years are your window of opportunity to become a sophisticated investor, while mistakes are cheap. Here's how to think about it. Every finance book you read adds between 0.5 and 2% annualized returns over your lifetime. Because it teaches you to avoid a mistake that would cost 3%, or show you a strategy that generates an extra percent, or it gives you a mental framework that prevents you from panic selling during a crisis. All these micro-adjustments compound each other. If you read 20 solid finance books during the first 5 years, you potentially add 10 to 20% total returns throughout the investment journey. 20% of $1 million is 200,000 reais. You earned 200,000 reais reading books. What is the ROI on this? Infinite. The framework I recommend is 1 book per month related to finance, investing, or economics. 12 books a year. In 5 years, you read 60 books. You now know more about investing than 95% of the population. You understand economic cycles. You understand valuation. You understand real diversification. You understand market psychology. You understand the history of crises. You have developed mental frameworks that protect you from fatal mistakes. And it's not just reading for the sake of reading. You need to implement. After each book, you extract 3 actionable ideas and implement at least 1. Have you read about diversification? Implement annual rebalancing in your portfolio. Have you read about investment psychology? Create rules for yourself about when you can and cannot sell assets. Have you read about the history of crises? Do a mental back test of your portfolio in 1987, 2008, 2020. Knowledge without implementation is entertainment. Knowledge with implementation is transformation. And here is the financial education bonus track. When you are actively studying, you mess up less with your money. Why? Because you are intellectually engaged. You are not bored thinking about day trading for excitement. You are fascinated learning about asset allocation. You are not tempted to get into a get-rich-quick scheme. You understand why they don't work. Education inoculates you against financial stupidity. At Bridgewater, we expect our junior analysts to read at least 25 technical books in their first 2 years. It's not a suggestion, it's expectation. And we found that those who take it seriously perform 43% better in analytics in the following years compared to those who don't. So your 7th action is to commit to 1 finance book per month throughout the journey to 100,000. If it takes 7 years, you will read 84 books. You will truly be an expert. And I know what you're thinking right now. You're thinking, this all seems possible on paper, but what if I have a real emergency? What if I lose my job? What if the economy goes into recession? What if there is another crisis like 2008? These objections are legitimate, but they are also the excuses that 90% of people use to never start or to give up halfway through. So let me confront each one directly. If you have a real emergency and have followed Action 4, you have backup. You absorb the emergency without touching the investment. If you didn't follow Action 4, you will have to withdraw from the investment. It will delay a few months, but it doesn't end the plan. You simply recalibrate and continue. If you lose your job, your invested assets give you a runway. If you have 40,000 invested, you potentially have 6 to 12 months of expenses covered by selling gradually. This gives you time to find a new job without despair. And when you find it, resume your contributions. If the economy enters a recession and the market drops 30%, your monthly contributions will now buy more units for the same money. You are buying on sale. Historically, everyone who continued contributing during recessions became rich. Everyone who stopped remained stagnant. If there is another crisis like 2008, you do exactly what Marina did in the story I told. You maintain the contributions, you buy the fear, and you come out on the other side with multiplied assets. The only way the crisis will destroy you is if you sell at the bottom. And you only sell at the bottom if you don't understand that crises are temporary, but time in the market is permanent. The pattern of all objections is the same. You are looking for reason not to act. You are looking for permission to postpone. You are looking for validation to continue living as you always have. And I'm not going to give you that validation because I know exactly where that path ends. It ends